The search for MH370 is officially slated to restart. Hi everybody, Jeff Wise here. It's December 3rd, 2025, and the Malaysia government has just announced that the private underwater survey company Ocean Infinity will officially recommence the seabed search for MH370 in 3 weeks' time. Today we're going to talk about why they're doing it now, where they will look, and whether they're likely to succeed. That's all right now. Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Finding MH370, the podcast where we rigorously assess the full range of available evidence in order to solve aviation's greatest mystery. Okay, here's the brief announcement that Malaysia's Ministry of Transport dropped today. This is what it said. The government of Malaysia wishes to update with the deep sea search for missing records of Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 will be resuming on 30 December 2025. Ocean Infinity has confirmed with the government of Malaysia that it will recommence seabed search operations for a total of 55 days to be conducted intermittently. The search will be carried out in a targeted area assessed to have the highest probability of locating the aircraft in accordance with the service agreement entered between the government of Malaysia and Ocean Infinity on 25 March 2025. The latest development underscores the government of Malaysia's commitment in providing closure to the families affected by this tragedy. Okay, that's all they said. Now, you'll remember that while the deal was indeed inked in March, after the first phase was well underway, Malaysia actually announced the deal last December, basically a year ago, saying that they had reached an agreement with Ocean Infinity to restart the search, which it had last conducted in 2018. Okay. This time, the area was going to be just 15,000 square kilometers, considerably less than the 112,000 square kilometers that the company had searched back in 2018. That first phase of the search didn't get underway until March. This past March, the ship Armada 7806 went back to the 7th Arc and scanned about 5,000 square kilometers, so about 1/3 of the area that they had announced back in December. They looked in an area that had already been scanned to make sure the wreckage hadn't been hiding in gaps in the original data. And then they looked at an area beyond the 7th Arc that had never been scanned before, but that 2 French independent investigators had suggested would be a likely place to find it. But it wasn't there, obviously. So then in early April, they put the search on hold again. Malaysia's Transport Minister Anthony Loke said, quote, "I think right now it's not the season," he said, referring to the onset of winter in the Southern Hemisphere. He went on, quote, "I think they," meaning Ocean Infinity, "have stopped the operation for the time being and will resume the search at the end of this year." He said end of this year, but the speculation was rife that what he meant was that they would be back in November. Turns out it was a little bit later than that, December 30th, as the announcement just said. So, as we've noted in the last 2 episodes of this podcast, the search vessel will probably be one of Ocean Infinity's newest ships, namely Armada 8605, which is a state-of-the-art vessel, just launched a few months ago. Right now, at this moment, as I'm talking, it's working on a project to look for historical shipwrecks in the San Bernardino Strait that's in between the islands of Samar and Luzon in the Philippines. Don Thompson is a guy who's been following these developments very closely. I've been communicating with him. He says that once this ship finishes that project, it will probably head west 1,500 miles to Singapore for refueling, resupplies, get a fresh crew. Then it will sail down to the search area down by the 7th Arc. That's about 2,700 miles, so it's going to take about 11 days. It's got a fair distance to cover. It's not, you can't do it that quickly. Okay, so once it gets there, Malaysia hasn't said where exactly it will search, but the wording of the announcement implies that it's going to be basically a continuation of the plan that it was doing in the first phase back in March, based on the same analysis. So I think it's pretty safe to say that once it gets there, it will be most likely continuing to work along the strip on the outer edge of the 7th Arc that it had started working back in March. And that's over an abyssal plain about 3 miles deep. So it's deep, but it's pretty flat, so not a lot of challenges in that regard. So once it's on station, What it's going to do is deploy its 3 Hugin AUVs, or autonomous underwater vehicles. These are robot subs. They look like sort of bright orange torpedoes. And they can operate at depths of up to nearly 4 miles deep and can stay out for about 72 hours, which is about 3 days at a stretch, before they get retrieved and recharged and then redeployed. So each AUV can cover about 42 square miles per day with its side scan sonar, basically taking photos with sound. So given that rate of coverage, Armada 8605's 3 AUVs could theoretically cover the remaining 4,000 square miles in more or less a month, if everything was going perfectly smoothly. But the thing is, Ocean Infinity, it's a busy company. It's got a lot of marine survey projects all around the world. So it might be that the ship is needed elsewhere before it can just finish in one go. So if it proceeds like Armada 7806 did back in March, then it will probably spend the better part of January, do another 5,000 square kilometers, probably return to port at Perth, and then either go back to the search to finish up, or, as Malaysia may have been implying when it said that the work would go intermittently, maybe it's going to go off, do a paying job somewhere, and then return when there's a gap between gigs. So that's where we stand right now vis-a-vis the search. We have a little bit of time left, but it's encouraging this is going to happen. Not a huge surprise, but it's still nice to hear. Now, before I finish this episode, I want to leave you with my answer to a question that I'm getting a lot lately, and that is, what do I think the chances are that the search will be successful? I pretty much answered that question in a fair bit of detail in the last episode, but for those of you who haven't seen it, let me put it in a slightly different way. So the reason that investigators have been looking on the seabed in the first place is that after the plane disappeared from Malaysian radar back on March 8th, 2014, a piece of communications equipment that had been turned off was turned back on again. We don't really know why. It's a bit mysterious. And once it was turned back on, it began transmitting signals that, because the system wasn't really working completely perfectly, it turned out to include hints as to where the plane had gone. It was not supposed to have these hints, but it did have these hints. So the Australian government scientists used the data, had to develop a new kind of mathematics, but they were able to calculate a probability map of where the plane's wreckage most likely lay. It's a little complicated. I've done multiple episodes about it, if you want to go back and look at those. But the long and short is that they calculated an area of 46,000 square miles that they figured had a 97% chance of containing the wreckage. But they didn't. It wasn't there. And also the 43,000 additional 1,000 square miles that Ocean Infinity subsequently searched, it wasn't in that place either. That absence implies that something really, really unusual happened. So the signals that were sent to Inmarsat right at the very end, just after the plane ran out of fuel, those signals indicate that the plane was in a near vertical dive. And so the fact that the plane's wreckage hasn't been found in the vicinity of that arc where that signal was sent really implies strongly that somebody in the cockpit, and presumably the captain, Zahari Ahmed Shah, manually pulled the plane out of the dive and eased it into a glide that took it beyond the search area. And that's why we haven't found it in the search area. He must have glided beyond it. But then, instead of easing the plane into the water, Miracle on the Hudson style, the person at the controls crashed it violently into the ocean. And the reason we think that is because there were small pieces of the interior cabin that later washed ashore in the Western Indian Ocean. Those small pieces imply that the fuselage came apart violently. So basically, we've got a long period of just waiting and waiting and waiting while the plane flies and flies and then runs out of fuel. Then an aggressive maneuver to push the nose straight down into a fatal dive. Then a change of heart into a glide, and then another change of heart into another dive. It's really hard to imagine why Shaw or anyone else would have wanted to behave in such a way, but that's where we are. That's about the only way you can explain how this search that's underway right now could be successful. It's something as strange as that happened. But here's the thing. If the plane isn't found in the current search, then what happened was even stranger than that. And what that could be, we're going to have to open up our imaginations a little bit. And I think in particular, the officials who are in charge of the search are going to have to open up their minds a little bit. And I think people who've watched this podcast a lot will know what I'm talking about. Anyway, thanks for watching. We've got an exciting few weeks ahead of us as we prepare for the search to start again. Be sure to send me your questions. If you have comments or ideas, let me know in the comments here. If you'd like to get an update about every episode as it drops, do check out the show page at findingmh370.com, where you can sign up for a free newsletter. If you'd like, you can also get a paid membership. That really helps out a lot. For now, this is Jeff Wise, and I'll see you next time.